Welcome, listener, to Lost and Searching. I'm your host, Seven, and today we're chatting to Will Yoxall. Will is the founder and CEO of an agency called Untapped, someone who's had a tech background and experience across acquired businesses and exited businesses. He and I met a couple of years ago, and whenever we sit down and chat, we have some really philosophical conversations that go in all sorts of directions. And today, I wanted to extract some of that, as well as his personal journey and those ups and downs in and around tech and business, to figure out more of his perspective on leadership, because he has a little bit of contrarian thinking, at least when it comes to the mainstream kind of stuff that you'll hear from the leaders we get to see on our screens a lot. And one of the questions you may know that I'm interested in is how being a leader shows up differently to just the kind of leaders we see on screens in their leadership positions. So join us today as we discuss carving out your own path and creating your future with your own two hands. With all that being said, let's get into it. Welcome to the show. Do you think being in person makes a difference?
Yeah, definitely.
For you?
I think in-person in general makes a huge difference, particularly working in the tech industry. So much is remote these days. It was a little bit before COVID and everything. But you can't replace the chemistry gained from in-person meetings.
When you say chemistry, how does that manifest for you? What do you mean by that?
There's a big difference between the eye connection that me and you have now in a conversation, and likewise with other meetings compared to through a computer screen. You can get a lot of good stuff done through a computer screen.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, and it's more efficient. You save hours of travelling, save petrol fumes going into the atmosphere, all of that stuff. But yeah, there's something about that human to human connection, even just a real handshake.
Yeah, I've got a belief. I feel like I really believe in energy. And there's an energy between all things, and especially between beings, and especially between human beings. And that energy transference makes a big difference. Something as simple as picking up someone else's vibe, knowing when to stop, knowing when to start, noticing what someone does. Like, it helps me a lot as the host, but I also just think it's more enjoyable. And I think when folks are picking that up from others, they enjoy it more too. So there's a transference into others. We do have a very back-to-back kind of life. We have a very post-COVID, we built these, or during COVID, we built these schedules of 12 half-hour Zooms back-to-back. No breaks for the bathroom or anything like that. And it became so regimented. I think we've still got some of it. And I really want to bring more people back together in person. It's why this show is only in person for me. It's I will not do online. Yep. Maybe in the future when it's bigger, if there are people I want to reach in other countries or whatever, it's really hard to just go flying for one guest or whatever. But for now, I really think that energy transference makes a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. I'd second that. And likewise, with the work we do, which I'm sure we'll talk about in at the right time. But we always try and meet people in person. At least, not necessarily for every meeting, but at least once or twice.
What difference does it make?
Makes a huge difference. An example, we started working with a fire security firm a couple of last months. We went up and did an all-day workshop with them obviously there were outcomes and an agenda for the day and the meeting, and we were doing a discovery workshop. But as much as anything, it was about meeting just in person, building that chemistry, knowing that, there's real people with real values behind the screen that you can trust.
I've noticed some things about you that are actually a little bit different to some of the people I speak to. And I think it's also a little bit different to, let's call it common groupthink when it comes to what leadership is. But to be able to understand that, we need to understand you a little bit more. Tell me a little bit about who you are and What I want to know with you specifically is I know your young and teenage years were really transformative for you. I mean, they are for everybody. But for you, there are some particular lessons you picked out. So let's walk through some of that.
Definitely. And before I dive into that answer, I think, yeah, I love meeting up with you. I'm incredibly philosophical and deep thinking, and an open book with no filter, which has its pros and cons in life. But yeah, and I think that leads to some very interesting conversations, and we think quite aligned. Leadership and good leadership is something that is the very pillar of my entire career. It's something I feel very passionate about. Not suggesting that I've mastered it yet. I don't think any of us ever truly master anything. We're always learning, and even as a human species, as science evolves, technology evolves, we learn more about how our minds, our bodies work. There's new things to learn, and then you need to take that into consideration and tailor your approach. Equally, I think leadership should be very bespoke to the individuals that you're leading. No two individuals are the same. So throughout life, I found you're always finding, coming across, managing, meeting, working with new types of personalities and individuals, and that requires a tailored approach.
So how did you get there?
So how did I get there?
Take us back to the beginning.
Yeah, take us back. Oh, where do you want to start?
Where do you want to start?
So I had what I would describe as a fairly turbulent childhood. I'll try and save you some of the rawest details, but my mum and dad split, which is fairly common in this modern world, I guess. My dad was a software engineer and then became a sort of businessman, looking after the technical side of a business, starting an agile consultancy. That was inspiring. I think it taught me, it made me want to go into business. I experienced secondhand some of those early lessons and challenges and thought it looked exciting. And equally, being a programmer, he always had a passion to teach kids how to program. So I was his guinea pig, and at a young age, our dinner time conversations were kind of good variable naming techniques and software patterns. I'll always remember the lesson on object-orientated programming, which was around a dog, and if you're going to model a dog in software, it has 4 legs, it has a bark, it has a tail, it has a hair type, and that hair type can be an array. It might be short hair, curly hair. And
I love this riveting dinner conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Probably too much detail for the non-techies, but yeah. So that really shaped me. On the other side, my mum was less fortunate in some regards, lived on some council estates in London. My half sister, who I'm incredibly close with. Shout out, by the way, she's smashing it in life now. But she had a really tough time of it. She always lived with my mum, I always lived with my dad. And I think that experience of having one parent who was very successful and another parent who was struggling through life really is at the cornerstone of a lot of my motivation. My big motivation in business, I don't think is financial success. Yes, that's nice, but it's about family security and security in general, which I think, there's a very clear tie there. And what it means to work hard. And I mean, I'm not underestimating that there's a lot of luck along the way, but I also believe you generate your own luck by putting yourself in certain situations repeatedly until you succeed, etc. But yeah, and that in the very early years, I think was a guiding principle to why it is I chose the career I did and I do what I do today.
Some of the most transformative things for you were not the norm. They were chance encounters, things you started doing.
I mean, when I was 16, I went to live with my aunt and uncle in Malta in New Zealand.
Malta and New Zealand, two very different places.
Two very different places. I was always, as a youngster, and this is where Untapped Potential, my agency, the kind of part of the name comes from, also building things that are untapped, haven't been tapped yet, etc. But that untapped potential thing has always resonated with me, and it's what I believe everyone, coming back to leadership for a second, everyone has that untapped potential in them, and as good leaders, it's our job to kind of to help nurture that, find that, and give people an environment to flourish.
But where did you get that? How did you develop that perspective?
I think over 15 years of experiences.
Okay. Do you have a fundamental core place where it all started?
No.
Okay.
No. I have there's a collection of milestones. I think for me, I knew from a young age that I was a very young age that I was essentially the head of my mum's side of the family. And I don't mean that, I mean that in the person who had to be responsible, had to be the provider. Way before I was old enough to be a provider, but I always knew that was the role that I had to play. I think from there, I can't even remember how far back, 10, I'd say, I've been reverse engineering businesses. I'll walk down the road and I'll see a carpet shop. I'll think, okay, how did they get to where they are? Are they a chain? If they are, what's made them successful? What hasn't made them successful? Is the marketing in the window good? Does it draw me in? Does it turn me off? What font choices have they used? All of these things. And I've always found that side fascinating. But then I think that was shaped through a series of experiences. My dad in his business journey, then went out to live with my aunt and uncle. That was a really good experience. Interesting few years, but I do credit them with a lot of the values that I took forwards, kind of instilling in me, hardworking, honest, loyal, things that I kind of hesitated because we take these traits for granted.
We just kind of pick them up. And when we're young, we're modeling behavior. We don't model words, right? Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do is kind of the other way around, actually. It's like children will do what you do, pretty much exclusively.
Yeah.
So where were you picking it up? How did it manifest? What did you notice and why did you like it?
I think mixture of people and experiences. Feel like I'm going to give that answer a lot today.
Okay.
But definitely from my father. He was a single dad, worked really hard, but was always there and present when needed, and found a way to juggle the two.
You don't usually hear that story, do you? You usually hear the one where a single parent actually doesn't do so well. They don't know how to be present, or you know what I mean? Something like that. So that's actually really touching to hear.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he would, stay up till 11 at night helping me do coursework, or just being there as someone to talk to, because I was a teenager going through, identity crisis and everything that we all go through as a teenager. And then get up at 4:30 to be at a client meeting for 8 a.m. And so a lot of inspiration and credit goes there. Then my aunt and uncle, they are very devout Christians, which is, I'm not myself, not that turning this into a religious conversation, but there's a lot of good values that come from faith, no matter what faith it is. And I find that really interesting. And that's something that I took on from that experience of whenever I have the opportunity to be educated about a new faith, I'm always on the lookout for what are the qualities and values that speak to me, that I want to take forward in life. in a general sense. Yeah.
Got you. So you lived with them, lived in other places. As you did, you mirrored and reflected on and learned these character traits and habits and ways of showing up from your father, and then you learned some of these other principles from these other family members. Why did you go to live with them? What's the story there?
I went to live with them for a number of reasons. I mean, the biggest one was that I didn't do very well at school. I didn't have that many options. Okay. So I actually got diagnosed about a year ago with ADHD and dyslexia. No real shock to those closest to me, but it kind of makes sense now looking back on my childhood. I always had a lot of potential. I was top set in most things, not English, surprise, surprise, but maths, science, etc. But I didn't have the attention span to capitalize on that potential.
Well, not in our education system in an exam.
Yes, yeah, totally. Or not to sit still in a classroom and etc. So yeah, and that caught up with me a little bit when I was kind of 15, 16. Just about got through with kind of bare minimum 5 GCSEs. And then was thinking, well, what are my options? I sent off some applications to be an apprentice for a few things. Jeweler, electrician, and something else that I can't remember off the top of my head now. Didn't get any responses. And then the opportunity came up. My aunt and uncle owned a scuba diving business in Malta. I mean, what 16-year-old wouldn't think that's a pretty cool place and way to live life?
I mean, I think that's pretty cool now.
Yeah, so do I.
Oh, okay.
So I went over to live with them and trained to be a scuba diving instructor.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So in a way, you got firsthand experience of the entrepreneurial, both from the business side of growing up with that from your dad, but then also you got involved yourself firsthand.
Yeah, definitely. And helping to grow that business. They then moved to New Zealand. And my uncle was, as well as the kind of recreational scuba diving, he was involved in commercial, like harbour repairs, ship repairs, that kind of diving. So they had that arm of the business. New Zealand wasn't great for business, and I think that was probably my first experience of, I wouldn't say business failure, but not doing as well in business as you hope, and then needing to pivot, find a solution.
What went wrong, and what was the pivot?
Lack of work, ultimately.
Okay, not enough clients.
Not enough clients. Interest. Yeah, okay. Not enough interest, not enough work out there. And the solution was to go back to Malta. Go back to what was working well. So then went back there and spent a year and a half there.
Okay.
Got to 18, I was loving it. My aunt also dabbled in a little bit of web design, kind of Dreamweaver stuff. So I kind of, picked up a few bits and thought, oh, that looks interesting. Yeah, got to 18 and thought, I think I should try and go to uni and nice. Actually, I think the business side had reignited itself, and I knew that I wanted to build a business and be successful, and it was a good time to get into web design. This is kind of early, mid 2000s.
And in your spare time, you're becoming a semi-professional poker player. I might be exaggerating.
No. It was, so that was more at uni. So, but we've gone through the story with a few tangents, which is natural for us.
Classic us.
Yeah.
Okay, so you start uni and you get into a few things.
Yeah, so I started uni, and online poker was very popular at the time. It was kind of that boom around 2007 or 8, and yeah, I just took to it really, like enjoyed it, understanding dopamine and these kind of things, and the risk, an appetite for risk and why, and all of these things that kind of make sense as well. But pattern recognition, being good at maths, having to be very decisive and make big decisions quickly, kind of high risk environment, high adrenaline environment. I just really enjoyed all of those things. And it was a big reason why I think I then went into the career that I did in both software and business.
Is the big takeaway here the noticing of what you do and don't enjoy? Or is there a bigger piece here, or maybe even a different piece, not bigger or smaller, but a different piece here around skills and the skills that were developed?
I think it's both. Definitely the skills. I credit a lot of the skills. So, and then when I left uni, I played poker for a year. So that was my job. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I say semi-professionally because I didn't do it. It wasn't a long career as such.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a good year. Not a very sociable year. 15 hours a day, mostly sat in the living room at home, grinding it out. Very addictive.
So online.
Online.
So you're just playing online for a living.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I would have assumed like tournaments or
yeah,
something.
no, I haven't. I never had the greatest poker face. I've got no filter.
So the online is perfect.
Yeah. So online is perfect. It makes the most of my, mathematic and pattern recognition and all these skills. But I can do what I want with my face.
Right. Okay.
But it's quite interesting because you can still read people even though it's online through patterns. I remember I had a friend from Nigeria from uni who stayed with me in that year after uni. So I was living in London. I had my sister and my mum over for the Christmas period, and my friend, couldn't get back to Nigeria, so he came and stayed with us over Christmas. And he was sat next to me during a poker tournament, which I ended up winning. And for the last 30 people or so, every time I played a hand, I told him what people had. And 8 times out of 10, I was right. Because you can tell by the pattern that people use and what they've got. So it's very interesting, but yeah, all online. So which was the main reason why I stopped. It was, I was enjoying it. I was making good money that I banked for later in life. But my personal belief is I wouldn't want to spend a life sat in at a computer screen 15 hours a day by myself. I don't think that's healthy for the brain long term. So after a year of doing that, I decided to, follow what I'd got my degree in and go and get a job in software.
How did you know that wasn't right for you? What were you feeling at the time that was giving you this sense of, I can't see this long term. This isn't what I want long term. How is that showing up for you?
Just lack of fulfillment. Not feeling fulfilled. I think there's so much in the world to be experienced. Human connection, traveling, seeing new places, seeing new cultures.
What you're with that, you're feeling not fulfilled. That's what you're not feeling. What were you feeling?
A lack of that. No, sorry, I'm joking. But it's what was I feeling? I mean, I was feeling. I'm incredibly stubborn, and I decide what I want, and I go and get it. And at that point in time, what I wanted was, to be a professional poker player. And so I decided what I had to do to go and get there, and I carved a path out and went a fair way along that path. I think the things I was feeling were the same things I feel now when I think about my business is growth, or is that you've got a point that you're trying to get to, you constantly plot and replot a path in order to get there, and then each day, each week, each month, you analyze your performance, your success, and you look for ways to improve. So that was the journey. I think I just got to a point where it was the social interaction thing that was the otherwise, and maybe if I could have, if I had a good poker face and I was, 50% of my time was spent in London casinos playing in person, and then maybe I'd still be doing that today.
Oh, that's interesting.
Um,
The reason I ask is because the brain has to do something, has to do some mental gymnastics to be able to think about what it doesn't like,
yeah,
to move away from what it doesn't want. You've probably heard this cliche thing of don't think about a purple elephant with wings or whatever, something crazy.
yeah.
The brain has to picture the thing it doesn't want to tell itself not to think about the thing, which means you have to think about the thing.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people will feel certain ways in life, and it's easier to ignore them if you don't know what it is you're feeling. So if someone is feeling emptiness, if what you're looking for is not fulfillment, it's much more challenging to acknowledge that than it is to acknowledge I am feeling emptiness. I'm not feeling this positive thing. That could be my fault. Maybe I'm just thinking about it the wrong way. I am feeling empty. I am feeling disheartened. I am feeling lonely. I am feeling disenergized, de-energized. These are things we can move towards understanding as opposed to needing to move away from understanding the thing that it isn't.
Yeah.
And that, I just wonder how much helps us navigate. I have a feeling that helps us navigate more powerfully the ability to listen to what we want and understand what we don't, and more confidently say, this isn't right for me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I agree with that. And I think in that scenario, I mean, to reframe it in that context, it was that loneliness and lack of. Also, I realised I'd hit a bit of a glass ceiling. There was no career progression. There was nowhere else to go where I was. It was either I just continued doing that forever, which I'd kind of decided I didn't want to do, or I went and found something else.
Yeah, it was just, you were just there for the money, and it wasn't, it wasn't feeling all the things you wanted it to feel. It was feeling a mix of lonely and a mix of, I guess if you could bottle up a feeling into a question, it sounds like the question was, where is this going?
Yeah. It was, because I'd kind of hit that peak at, I don't know, 22 or so. And
how boring.
Yeah.
To hit a peak at that young.
Yeah. And so I was, thought, right, well, I'm bored of this now. It's not challenging anymore. It was lack of challenge as well.
And so instead, you go into entrepreneurship and building a business.
Not directly.
Okay, so how do you get into that?
So I had two permanent jobs. So my first was at a company called Mobile Interactive Group, which got acquired twice.
Twice?
Sorry, the next company was acquired twice. That was acquired once. So Mobile Interactive Group got acquired by Velty. They did a lot of the early SMS TV competitions and stuff like that. But they also had a lot of mobile websites. This is in the days before responsive web design. Okay. So you used to have a separate mobile website that people would be directed to and a desktop website. And my job was to build and maintain these mobile websites.
Okay. What was it like to go through an acquisition, and then that second company that got acquired twice? What's a second acquisition? As in, the company that acquired it also got acquired?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I was like, what's two acquisitions? So you went through effectively 3 acquisitions in a few years. What was that like from an employee standpoint?
Turbulent. I found it really enjoyable. I don't think most people would, but I'm always looking for lessons, and particularly lessons in business. So from that perspective, I felt I learnt a lot. I got made redundant twice, which was brilliant, because it gave, as a young person, it gave you that slight cash boost not to just have to survive. And to follow dreams or that kind of thing. It was just interesting, lots of change, lots of, a feeling that, things are always changing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. People come and go, people get made redundant. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's
the framing. I was literally just thinking, like, had I been made redundant before starting this podcast and gotten some money as a result, that might have actually been a good thing, because I didn't. I just left a contract I'm finishing up. But had I gotten made redundant, I might have had a chunk of money to survive for longer without needing to think of contract work. So actually, it's all the framing. Obviously, I don't have a whole family to take care of, and so it's there's contextual details. But yeah, you're so right. You get to go through the challenges that will later potentially, or can later, define how you choose to view the world, right? You're pushed into a challenge, you get the chance to respond. When you get the chance to respond, you get the chance to see who you really are and if that is the person you want to be.
Agree with that completely. I've had a lot of opportunities for that, more than most maybe, and haven't always been happy with what I found, but I've always used it as a way to reflect and improve.
Yeah, well, what they say is sometimes the world doesn't give you what you want, but that is what you need.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And some of the biggest and best lessons you can learn in life are the ones that make you realise you're not currently the person you want to be. But then without going through that, I think it would be hard to become the person you want to be.
So who were you at that point? Who did you want to become?
I always wanted to be a successful business person. I mean, like, I don't know exactly where that came from. I mean, well, I kind of do a little bit, I guess. We've talked about the early years and what motivated me. But, even at university, I used to have a joke with all my closest friends. I was going to build a big business empire and retire at 30. It was just what I wanted to do. I was so driven by it. Started my first web design company at uni. I was also just too interested in having fun and experiencing life, so didn't give it the dedication that it needed to succeed. But again, that was a lesson I then took forwards. So when I was ready to seriously do it, I knew exactly what sacrifices and where to focus my energy. And what else? I think at that point in life, I was learning about myself. I was enjoying life. I was meeting new people, building the skills. We learn a lot as children, but we never stop learning. I think I don't know what it's like for wide audiences of other people, but personally, I was on a big learning curve all the way up until 25, 30. It didn't stop at 18 when you become an adult. I think that's true for most people, I guess.
Yeah, I do too. I've used this analogy a few times on the show. There's a very famous speaker named Deepak Chopra, and he's an author. He's authored a ridiculous number of books as well, and he's uses a Hindu concept that our lives can kind of be broken down into 4 stages, each 25 years up to 100. Obviously, it's not super strict, and you might not live as long as 100 or past it or whatever, but these rough 4 stages are: the first 25 years of your life is for play and exploration and learning. Second 25 years is for building. The third is for giving back. And the fourth is essentially preparing for death, acknowledging you're going to pass on. And those things can happen in other parts of your life, of course, lifelong learning and all that good stuff. But really, roughly speaking, I get really sad when I hear young people like 18, 19, 20, 21 who are like, I haven't made it yet, I'm a failure. It's like that stage of your life hasn't even ended for you to start building. If you can build from younger, great, and you always keep learning, and if you can give back, etc., great. But there is just like, what is your baseline? What is your standard? And I do think folks like you and I have gotten a lot of chances to learn things from younger ages, and one of the primary levers we have is that we appreciate it. I have a saying that the amount of time doesn't matter nearly as much as what you do with that time. You have 20-year-olds who are wiser than 50-year-olds because those 50-year-olds just blazed through life and woke up one day and was like, what's going on? Whereas if you question things and you spend time being reflective, actually you make more use of that time. So with that kind of appreciative lens that you have now, looking back through that time in that life, you felt this calling to be a person you wanted to be, and you learned not just through choice to go learn, but to do things, and you learned from that experience. You went through these acquisitions, you had that firsthand experience. All of it starts to culminate to build this picture and this pattern that is you, and you go into business at some point. When was that, and when what pushed you to finally take the plunge?
It was so from the two redundancies, the two full-time jobs, about 4 years, my early career, grounded lots of software engineering principles, but it was on the second redundancy. And particularly thinking about lessons learned and the people we are on the first redundancy, it wasn't loads of money, but I used it. I helped my mum out, and I booked myself on a skiing holiday with a bunch of people I'd never met before from an online forum, which is a bit crazy. But when the opportunity, but then I reflected on that and I thought, is this a missed opportunity? Just think, on that note. So when the same thing happened again due to, so two acquisitions, and they just didn't have the need for the department that we did and the business service that we were offering. They were acquiring for the clients, not for the products. So the second time I was like, right, this is my chance. I'm going to, take this. I'm going to very carefully use it to start my own business. That was when Untapped was formed, 2017.
I think the piece around excitement and being realistic about the challenges with it, right? I think a lot of us jump into these things now because they're sexy, right? I want to be my own boss. It's one of the worst reasons you can get into business. You can make significant money, but you might not for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned when you were younger, you thought it was really exciting. What's the reality with 2017, so 7-8 years of doing it now?
It's harder than I thought it would be. More rewarding as well. With me, you'll get a double edge with everything, right? Mm-hmm. So I look at the lesson to be learned and how to turn that into a positive outcome. But how come? Maybe this comes from my naive thinking as a young man, looking back on it now. But as a young man, you've got to wear more hats than you realise. So you might expect to wear 6 different hats, but you'll end up wearing 10 or 12. It's, the global economics, the impact that has on business. That's not something I considered as a youngster until I was in it and I had to find a successful way through it. And the value of relationship building. Now, and that's something where I always knew that was important. So I did a lot of it. And that is largely what got me through. But it wasn't strategic as well at that point. It was just, I was a social butterfly and just tried to build, relationships, genuine relationships, but build relationships with anyone and everyone that I could. And I just think it took, and it takes longer than you think, and I think that's a large part of the society, the social media, the films, all of this kind of stuff that we grow up with now, where, people become tech billionaires overnight. I grew up through the Facebook and the, Google, etc., where these companies didn't exist. It felt at the time like, one day they didn't exist and the next day they were the global powerhouses that they are. Obviously, oversimplifying it on purpose a little bit, but that's what it felt like at the time. So it gave you a subconscious feeling of that's what tech entrepreneurship is like. I think it's a lot of hard graft, but it's worth it. It's rewarding in equal measure though as well.
Yeah, rewarding how?
Seeing people's, this is going to sound really cliche, but seeing people's lives change for the better through products that you have helped build. And just having happy clients. The first is the most rewarding part. Been fortunate enough to work on a number of projects that have given that. But also, yeah, just really enjoying that process. So something that I love doing, and I think is the cornerstone of why Untapped's been successful. I have a unique blend of kind of business, design, and technology experience. I was mainly a software engineer, but then I had interest in these other areas. And I just get a real kick out of speaking to people who have a vision and then finding a way to make it happen.
Talking about pattern recognition, something I've done with a few guests now, especially in the startup space, I've been around it so much. One of the few things that I think humans are naturally pretty good at is pattern recognition.
Mm-hmm.
It's a skill that can be developed for sure. Having seen so many businesses, one of the patterns I've noticed are the patterns that lead to a greater chance of success in the person leading it. And if you're excited by what you're building, it's inevitable that something will come from that. It doesn't mean it's not going to be hard graft, so to speak, as you say, on the way there, but you follow this pattern, or you fit into the pattern of what is going to increase your chances of success. Enjoying the product, I think it's important to say the product, you build physical tech products, but the product is just the result you create. If you run a service, that's the product. If you take people through an experience, that's a product. In a way, we are the product in our own lives. So even if we're talking interpersonal, personal relationships, you are the product. Keeping yourself healthy, happy, able to give is also the product in your life. And so in all these ways, if you're enjoying building the product, upkeeping the product, and wanting the product to change lives and enjoying the impact it's having, there's a sense of energy I think it gives, and this almost becomes cyclical because you give your energy to something that changes someone somehow, that gives energy back to you, and it just becomes a cycle. Would you agree with that, or would you describe it differently?
No, I would agree with that, and I think it can be applied in many different ways. But yeah, that and I guess that's what I was saying about that feeling of making clients happy. It's that energy exchange that you described. I also had a thought. I'm now a parent, so I've got a 3.5-year-old and a 4.5-month-old, and that's been a really interesting experience with thinking of it in terms of my core values, my priorities, motivations in life, etc. But you want to give that energy back, but also you need to look after yourself and be the best version of yourself, because that in turn then gives you the ability, the energy, the thinking time or space or whatever it is that you need to then be the best parent you can be. If you get too focused on just constantly, and the same applies to business, but this is just an example, doing whatever it is that the children need, and this is just my opinion, 100% of the time, and you let yourself go because you're staying up too late at night doing something, preparing an arts and crafts session for the next morning. But actually, yes, the arts and crafts session is amazing and they're going to love that bonding with you. But if you get that extra 2 hours sleep, are they going to benefit more because you're, that kind of thing, you're more healthy.
What's the trade-off? Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree that with what you were saying.
When we started the conversation, you mentioned security and being, fairly focused on security, wanting to create security. Entrepreneurship, leading anything that is creation of something new is risky by nature. And entrepreneurship can be especially risky. And especially when you're going through the hurdles of not having much money, because in your early days, you might not make much, and that compounds. These are actually two different challenges that compound. What have you learned about security as a result of your journey, considering that you actually had quite a high risk tolerance, relatively speaking, or you got used to risk and dealing with risk?
I'm a massive risk taker in general, calculated risk, I would say. But
that doesn't surprise me hearing your poker stories.
Yeah. No, I love it. I live for it. But in a calculated manner. And it's why me and my fiance bounce off each other so well, because I'm a calculated risk taker. She's a careful, considered researcher. So you put those two personality types together, and it works very, very well.
What have you learned about security as a result of this journey you've been on?
So my first experience of personal entrepreneurship. So after I left my second job, which was in advertising, Fourth Screen became Opera Media Works, became Ad Colony, which is why I had to think which of the three companies was it, but it was all of them. I got involved with a news aggregation app, which was kind of a cool concept. The idea being that for health and fitness, people who were big on their health and fitness, you could put in the topics that you were interested in, and it would go out every day and source all the best articles and categorize them. So you had, your news and that kind of thing. And I joined that as technical lead, mainly just to build the mobile app. I'd always been focused in mobile development in different kinds, be it web and then now mobile apps. And I fell in love with mobile apps, which is why Untapped is predominantly a specialist mobile app agency. We're full service and we do a lot of complex web builds and branding and marketing, etc. But we're specialists in mobile apps. So, but that was my first experience of entrepreneurship. It wasn't successful, mainly because after about 2 years, it gained some good traction, got some good users. But Apple brought out a part of its Apple News, which was installed by default on every iPhone that was shipped, which basically did the same thing.
Nice.
So
absolutely undermined.
yeah. But that taught me a lot about the importance of capitalizing on an opportunity.
How so?
We had an opportunity to be first in the market. Had we have been quicker, had we have speed. Had we have been quicker, we could have potentially built such a good solution that it didn't matter that Apple brought something out, because we were already so far down the road.
Got you. You think you started too late, or you took too long while building, or?
I think we took too long in hindsight.
Okay.
Year to market. You can draw up a perfect scenario. You do what you can with the funds you've raised, the capabilities you've got with your internal team, etc. So I think we probably did the best that we could do, but had we have been faster, like a year ahead, so if we'd have launched the first product after 6 months and done the iterations and improvements over 6 months, we may well have had the edge and built up such a loyal customer base by the time Apple's product came out that we still had a slice of the pie.
Or maybe even sell it to them instead, or
exactly.
something.
Yeah.
Or give it to Android, have them compete, whatever.
Yeah. Okay. There's lots of opportunities there. But coming back to the point around security, that taught me that I enjoyed the startup ecosystem. I enjoyed entrepreneurship, but I wasn't going to put all my eggs in one basket and just be a startup founder. So I then built Untapped as a services business, mainly to build products for other people, with the intention of investing in some of those products along the way myself. So building an investment portfolio, and building our own products, with the team that we have, when there's downtime between client work, etc. And that's what we've been doing to date and doing very successfully. And it's very enjoyable. And then going forwards, who knows what the future holds?
Yeah.
I've got a few big plans, but
Nice.
who knows?
One of the reasons I ask about security is because I think security is one of these societal myths, in the sense that it assumes that security exists.
Mm-hmm.
Security is a word we get really attached to because we want it. We naturally, as humans, we want it. But there is no such thing as an absolute avoidance of risk.
Mm-hmm.
It's this now classic example of, if someone wants to avoid all risk and danger, you'd be at home in bubble wrap, or whatever, and then you're not living a life. But we do apply this. This gets applied to children more often. I heard this interesting study that basically looked generation by generation, how far would parents be happy with their kids going from their house without them?
Yep.
So one generation, it was like 3 blocks away. Then the next, it's like only on our street. And then it's outside my house. Then it's only in my front yard. Then it's nowhere without me. It's generation by generation. And it reflects in the way people show up. If I go into central London, the tube, super cold, no one talks to each other, no one trusts each other, everyone might steal my stuff or do stuff to me. And I just think it's such an unhealthy way to live.
Mm-hmm.
And how much of it comes from this myth that we're keeping ourselves more secure by doing that, not just physically, but maybe emotionally too. And then that ends up being applied to our career. It's safer to stay working for big company X. Well, actually, they can make you redundant tomorrow. You know what I mean? And not care. And you might not get a bonus or a payout like you did, especially depending on where you live in the States, you can get let go like that. So I wonder how much we are just overtly attached to what we think security is. And as a result, we're actually it's not security, it's fear. At what point do we know the difference? What's the line?
It's a very interesting point. I think the lines are mixed, always. I think the desire for security is the fear of not being secure, to put it like that.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So, and I think I agree completely that you're never truly secure. I mean, you could, finance provides a certain level of security, but doesn't matter how much money you've got, you can always make a bad investment or do things incorrectly, and or the economy turns, and you've got it in the wrong places, etc. There's a myriad of ways that you can lose your security there. So I think it's about spreading risk. If you're going to minimize, and it's something that, because of my early life experiences, security has always been paramount to me. I agree that you can never be truly secure, and I'm a massive risk taker. So how do you bundle all of that up and carve a path? And for me, it's just been spreading. So, but also then not spreading yourself too thin, which I've learned the hard way over the years. But have investments in lots of different things. Savings ISAs, stocks and shares, a bit of houses, a bit of entrepreneurship, a bit of a side hustle, etc. And split that risk out. So then if one or two go down, you've still got others on the up. Or if you're lucky, they all go up, and and it's a good place to be.
Well, it's portfolio diversification, right? And for those that aren't financially educated / literate, so to speak, I'm reading a book right now called The Millionaire Fast Lane, which sounds a bit bullshitty, and the author does that on purpose, where kind of outlines the idea that the classic thing is, keep all your money, all your eggs in one basket or a couple of baskets, but like diversified baskets. So the S&P 500 always goes up by 8%. I was checking my assets last night, actually. My gold has gone up by 25% in the last year. Crypto's all over the place, but you have a little bit of different stuff in different stuff. Business is different. You have different stuff in different stuff. And then when you focus on improving your income streams, now you have the closest thing to security that actually exists. But because it stops being fear-based and is more interesting, you now actually have a likelihood for greater returns. There's the psychological acceptance of that, though, which is the cost of entry.
Yes.
And the reason I think it's really interesting is because how many of us feel held back because it's more secure to do what we're doing right now, you know?
I think as humans, we take the safe option most of the time.
Which is natural.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that.
There's no judgment.
I somewhat envy people who can do that, because that's not me as a person, but that has put me and my family through some tough times because I don't take the safe option, and yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. And I think, we live in a society where financial wealth is considered wealth, and it's one element, but not the most important.
Yeah, there's a book right behind you, Robin Sharma's The Wealth Money Can't Buy. He goes through 8 forms of wealth.
Yeah.
And it isn't my favorite book of his, but it does really clearly outline wealth is bigger than money. We have associated the two, but actually money is financial wealth. Craft, for example, might be a different type of wealth, the wealth of enjoying your purpose and why you get up every day. Family is a type of wealth that's very purposeful and very human and brings out more of your being. And
definitely.
Having this harmony between these different elements of your life.
Really important.
And you have now been working on this for a while, and business is really picking up. Things are going really well. You paid your cost of entry by going through some of those more tough times where I'm sure business would have been a little bit slower, income would have been more tight, and time would have been ridiculously tight, right?
Yep.
Probably overworking. Walk me through the experience of the highs and the lows, and then what do you think has really made the difference in helping things take off for you now?
So I think what's made the difference is stubborn persistence. But I'll then go back and tell the story to there. But I think there was 3 to 5 years that were particularly tough. So Untapped's been going now 7 or 8 years. For a mixture of reasons, I consider myself incredibly fortunate, and I value that, and I think you've got to recognise fortune when it's there. Being a software engineer, I always had a relatively good backdrop to fall into if business itself wasn't good. I'd just go and do some freelance or contract work for 3 months, and that got through a lot of it. But then the flip side of that was there were times when I was always had this vision of where I was taking the business and what I had to do to get there, and commitments. I take commitments and loyalty incredibly seriously, which I think are underrated traits and values in modern society. So if I say to someone something's going to happen, it happens. I'll find a way. That's my responsibility. I've made the commitment. But so for most of the last 8 years, I'd probably be doing 60 nowadays, 6 days a week, most of the time. So really became a workaholic. I have a very addictive personality. So in my later years, that's just been work.
An addictive personality means people get addicted to your personality. So you get addicted to things. That's what you mean.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, whether it's games consoles when I was younger or whatever.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Probably drinking too much in my early 20s. We all go through that to a bit. Working in advertising probably didn't help. But Yeah, so and that's not sustainable for the long term. But that was how I got through it. So yeah, I consider myself very fortunate that I was in an environment where, and I know that not everyone has this, and so yeah, I feel very fortunate. I've said that 6 times in the last 5 minutes, but I do. But
Good.
you know, if things were tough, and that if from a business perspective, because that's the big scare for entrepreneurship, right? Is that if things aren't going so well, where does the money come from? How do you survive? As long as I could go without some sleep, I never had that problem, because I'd just go and do some software engineering work, which I'm very grateful for. And yeah, that was the survival method. I think the turning point for me was then having my first child, because I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't, you know, I still do, but wanted to be a present, hands-on father, not just someone who was off to work all the time. The flip side of that is being present and hands-on in this modern world where, you know, we can work from our phones, or you can be in the room, but you're not in the room psychologically. And I think that's a lot worse with the work from home culture, which is that's the journey I'm on right at the moment. How do I navigate that successfully, the way that I want to? But yeah, so I had limited time for the first time in my career, and so I had to very carefully prioritize. But I think that was good, because it then drove me. That's when the real growth started. So yeah.
So you almost become more disciplined as a result.
Yeah.
This seems to push the results further, faster too.
Yeah.
There's also the snowball effect. Things start to compound.
Definitely. And going back a little bit, as I said, one of the factors to the success that I think I've had is just stubborn persistence over a long period of time. So that's a big part of it as well. And, the fact that I then had to prioritize my time is just a small factor. I think that's the main factor, really.
So you go through these years learning these skills, the snowball starts to roll, and about a year ago, as you mentioned, you finally get diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia.
Yes, yeah. And that was a big turning point for me. I think things made sense. I've always been a no bullshit, no filter, heart on my sleeve guy, and I stand by that. I think 90% of the time it's a very positive thing. 10% of the time, it's kind of, you can overwhelm those around you, and or thinking from a leadership perspective, where you're delegating tasks, or you can give too much information. You can definitely give too little, but you can go the other way as well. But yeah, that was a big turning point for me. And I think since finding that out, and getting some meds to help, let's not beat around the bush, but it's really leveled me out. And I think I was always scared, and I say this in case there's anyone potentially listening to this in the future who's thinking in the same way. I felt like my personality and my traits were both my superpower and my biggest weakness. And I was always scared of opening the door to psychiatry, diagnosis, medication, etc., that it might take away the bits that I considered made me.
Yeah.
And you open the door to all kinds, but that hasn't been the case at all. It just levels, for me, and everyone's experience is different. The biology of every human makeup reacts differently with different drugs, etc. But my experience was that, it just leveled me out, and it allowed me to focus even more on the bits that I considered made me and my best traits and the superpowers, and gave me more control. It didn't eliminate the bad things, but it just gave me a bit more control over them.
One of my concerns when we diagnose someone with pretty much anything is the method of delivery is really important to ensure that the brain doesn't become its own worst enemy. Instead of going, I now show up according to certain patterns that can be helpful and unhelpful, often a diagnosis is delivered as you are now ADHD. And that stands for disorder, right?
Yeah.
ADHD. The last D in that is disorder.
Yep.
You are disordered. And so instead of saying you show up a little bit differently, it's you are disordered in your being. It's who you are. And that framing, that language can become very, very heavy for people. It can lead to all kinds of challenges, from the personal emotional experience to, the use of excuses. One of my extended friends, a good friend of mine, he is on the spectrum. He has Asperger's. And I remember years and years ago, I think we were just out of uni or whatever, or even still there. And he said to us, like, he's very capable of navigating despite being on the spectrum, of navigating on his own in life. And he kind of said, like, look, this is what I have and how I show up. Just at a moment of like complete honesty, was like, but it's not an excuse. So I want you to call me out if you need to. And it's that taking ownership of it, as opposed to allowing the label to become who you are. That spiral, though those are two very different directions. What he said to me was so inspiring. And I just want to be able to understand how more of us can take that perspective. How did you go about navigating having your diagnosis? How did you allow it to be something where it gave to you as opposed to define you?
I think because of my passion to understand things and analyze things, I saw it as another piece of information about myself that I could choose to either use to better myself or to define me, although that never really entered into my psyche. But I understand that it would, for a lot of people. Having said that, I do still use it as an excuse unintentionally. I try to call myself out on it. Particularly around the house, is where, because I think like with any of these things, it's when you're on subconscious, you're kind of operating without too much thought. In a work career environment, you're generally fairly considered, you want to do your best, you want to, etc. It's when you're kind of switched off at home, relaxed, and whether it's, getting overwhelmed because understanding overwhelm. So I didn't understand overwhelm before my diagnosis. I just thought that I was getting uptight and grumpy, whereas I now understand that, I get overwhelmed, and then, so what do? You go and have a few deep breaths and take a couple of minutes. So I think it's just taking things like that and treating it as, I've got some new information. How am I going to use this positively?
I think this is such an important reframe. Is the very simple understanding that what we're experiencing is not in our being, but is a tool we can choose to use. Our identity is a tool we can choose to use. Our ego isn't bad. It's there for a reason. It's a tool we can choose to use. And it's simply an understanding of, if you're always carrying a hammer around, how are you going to see every problem, right? That classic analogy. Understanding that not every tool is useful all the time. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Use it as a tool when it's useful. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned to me that you've developed the belief that if someone in a company isn't working out, it's more on the company than it is on that person. It's more of a failing of something to do with the processes or the culture or the leadership of the company or the leaders in the company than it is on that person. Mm-hmm. Walk me through that belief, that perspective, how you came to it.
I feel very strongly about this. I think that obviously, it doesn't always apply. There might be 10% of scenarios where people are just there for the ride and trying to, take as much as they can from life without giving back. But most people, I don't think, are like that. And I think there's a lot of people that don't do well in their working environments, that truly want to succeed and want to work hard, but don't have the right tools or environment to do so. It was shaped by a personal experience. In one of my early jobs, I had my one and only disciplinary in my career, so like a verbal warning for not pulling my weight, essentially. And it really hurt. Like, it really...
Hurt how? What were you feeling?
I felt it was unfair. I was unjustly treated because I knew deep down how much I wanted to succeed, how hard a worker I was. I'd felt betrayed by the fact that I didn't have tasks provided to me that were challenging and allowed me to show my capabilities, and that I, maybe a bit misunderstood or in terms of feeling. So, I credited, and being the analyzer that I am, I spent a lot of time thinking, well, how did this happen? This is something that I don't want to happen again. It's not supportive of my career ambitions. It's not a fair reflection on who I am as a person. And I spent a lot of time thinking about why it happened. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was young. I'm not trying to absolve myself of any responsibility. I was presented in a situation where, I could have proactively gone and found other things to work on, etc. But at its core, I was a very ambitious, hardworking individual that was getting bored, and, maybe a bit of ADHD stuff there as well. So, and I thought, and that experience is one of the founding leadership principles of, and I've said this everywhere where I've ever been a leader, my job as a leader, and I think an organisation's job should be, from a leadership perspective, to give people the tools and the environment they need to be the best versions of themselves.
That last part I absolutely agree with. One of the reasons I ask is because I think the principle itself is a little bit contrarian to some people. Probably doesn't sound like it, because it sounds quite kind when you put it that way, right? But I've worked with so many startup entrepreneurs, founders, who are growing so quickly. And the classic thing to say is, the people I needed later on were not the people I needed at the beginning. And those people either didn't grow with the business, or their skills are just really good for something small and scrappy, and they're not right for the bigger company. But what if that person wants to stay? You could have given your blood, sweat, and tears to something when it was smaller, and you weren't making as much money because it was smaller and the startup didn't have the money or whatever. And then now it's like, well, you have to move on. You might have stock or options or whatever, but what if this, a piece of this now feels like it's your baby too, and you want to keep giving to it? And I noticed these two kind of threads of thinking, where you would think that there's more overlap. I would think that there's more overlap than there is, but they tend to go down two different paths. One is like what you're describing, which is very like Richard Branson, train your people, otherwise what if they stay and they're not great, and take the responsibility type of thing. And the other thread is this startup perspective of, look, people might not be right, learn to fire quickly if you need to.
Yep. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I definitely put myself in the former bucket of the two approaches there, but I can be ruthlessly decisive when I need to be, and I think that's important from a business perspective. But we should always remember to do it with humility, if that's the right word, and care and consideration. And I think that came from my redundancy experiences. So, yeah, those were unpleasant at the time. As a young man, I questioned myself a lot. Looking back from an understanding business more, I get it, and it was great. But So business is business. We need to make decisions. We need to move things forwards, but you shouldn't forget that it's the people that make the businesses successful. And always be mindful of that. Always try and work with people to find an alternative. Maybe it's thinking of the example you were mentioning with, someone who was brilliant at the start of a business, but not so much further on. There's probably alternate roles that they can try, or you want to try lots of you want to ensure that you've explored all avenues collaboratively before, and I think the startup world, and I guess this alludes to a point you made early on, which I kind of wanted to ask you about because I thought it was interesting, where you mentioned, I'm not the typical startup founder, so to speak. And I thought that was interesting. And, my question back to you in a second is, well, what are the differences there? Because that's interesting. I want to analyse. But yeah, the startup world is ruthless and it is cutthroat and too much so, I think. And that's probably why, we've made steady progress. We're 12 people now. We are pretty stable. We've got brilliant household name clients, but probably could have got there in a third or half of the time with a different approach, but that wouldn't have been as caring and as ethical and moral to certainly my personal values and standards of human relationships.
Well, I think in that case, there's a chance that you wouldn't have gotten there. There's a chance that as a result of that, you would have stumbled, or you would have gotten to hit the financial goals, but then you would have reached a glass ceiling of some kind. Or, honestly, you never know what could have come up. If you have a mindset approach of just, make as much money as quickly as possible, the really annoying, salesy, sell type of mindset, who knows what you get into, because you attract a certain type of energy. You might be attracting someone who, I don't know, will try to screw you over or you end up getting sued for something, and then this wastes all your time, or your family's not happy with you, and then that starts to break down, and loads of things can happen. So I think you actually have gotten to where you are because of that. I have a bit of a belief that, and I haven't figured out exactly how to describe this. No one's really picked this up from me yet, or seems to have thought about this. So I wonder if I'm just going crazy, but I have a theory that we all have a glass ceiling within our ability, or a glass ceiling capping our ability to achieve material success beyond our level of personal development, really broadly speaking. So, for example, you get people who can be really unhappy, really poor with the personal development side of things, developing their, as Robin Sharma would describe it, mindset, health set, heart set, and soul set. And it's just all about the money. They just blaze through, they just do the sales, they deliver the product, whatever. They make loads and loads of money, millions and millions and millions, and they realize, oh shit, I'm not happy. And they have to spend the money figuring out what to do next and how to be happy, with a mix of therapy and distractions, and maybe, if they're more awakened, pivoting their life. And the theory is essentially that is a small subset of people whose glass ceiling is higher. That for most of us, our glass ceiling is lower, more close to our level of personal development, where if we don't do the development work, there's no amount of work we can do that will ever allow us to make the money. I think mine is very low. I am pretty much useless until I am feeling happier, healthier, more awakened, more conscious, more loving, more energized, and therefore also need to be purposefully aligned to what I'm doing. I think I've made more progress with this podcast in the last month, and 2-ish months, than I have with the last business I was a part of, where I was handling all the sales and brought in, multiple five figures in just a couple of months of sales. And that's partly because there was more of a team there and things like that. But that sounds on paper more impactful. Yep. But this has actually had more relative growth because I was starting closer from scratch and these things, but it didn't matter because it was more aligned. I had broken out of a bit of a shell and gone towards something more aligned. And this was after years of failure in personal development. Then my glass ceiling raises. However, that glass ceiling for me personally is so low. I failed at businesses for 7-8 years over and over and over again, mostly because I was getting in my own way. And until that changed, there's no amount of work I can do that would change anything. There's a few reasons I reflect on this. One is speaking to what you mentioned earlier of where you learned and noticed and developed, and then as a result, you continue to develop while business developed. And that increased your capability to receive and how much you did or did not get in your own way as time went on. And then it just so happens, kind of semi-answering your question, patterns. Well, that snowball happens, sort of in tandem with greater growth and greater awareness. To me, that's not surprising because you were opened up for more to receive more. So that's part of why I reflect on this kind of glass ceiling. Part of it, though, is kind of that message I mentioned earlier of younger people who beat themselves up because they haven't achieved whatever by 21. Is, it's so easy to compare ourselves to people online. But if I think about, let's say, like the Stephen Bartlett's of the world, who, by his own admission, was not a happy, healthy person until 26, 27, when he sold a business and moved on to stuff, it's like he is one of those rare individuals where your glass ceiling can be quite high despite not having done, by his own admission, the personal development work until later. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we espouse, we glorify the people who have just put in the hard work regardless of what's going on inside. And my theory, which because I'm not a science person, I have no way of really proving at this point, but my theory / educated guess / assumption is that we're putting these people on a pedestal whose glass ceilings happen to be higher, thinking we can all do the same. We don't have to do the work. We don't have to think within. We don't have to reflect. And actually, that's a small subset of people. So we're glorifying a small subset of people who happen to be able to do that when most of us can't. And it's why folks like yourself, to me, are so interesting and inspiring, and why your journey is so fascinating to break down, because you are like most of us in the best possible way. You did this work on yourself that unlocked your ability to create more. And I can't help but wonder what world we'd live in if more of us realized that and did that without remorse, as opposed to comparison and beating ourselves up for that comparison.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. There's a lot of angles that we could take that.
What's coming to your mind?
Well, I think glass ceilings and comparison culture. They're so I broadly agree with everything you've said. I think internal glass ceilings are a really interesting one. My thoughts are quite conflicted. I believe that we are incapable of certain growth until we've done personal development. I resonate with that. On the flip side, I believe that the glass ceiling is only where you believe it is. You can achieve whatever you believe in, whatever you want to achieve. It's up to you to find a path to get there. So, and actually, that comes down to the glass ceiling being where you set it at a given time. So if you've gone through the personal development and you're ready to put the glass ceiling right up here and achieve the unthinkable, then you're in a position to do that for most people. If you're feeling like you're getting in your own way, which I've done from time to time as well, then then it's lower. And I think it can fluctuate as well. Like most of the time, I think my ceiling is out of sight. I genuinely believe in my heart of hearts I'm going to have an asteroid mining company one day. Probably when space flight and rocket fuel is a bit more sustainable, and there's a few issues with that industry. But
yeah, I know you like the space industry.
I love it. I'm talking to someone. I probably can't say too much about it, but yeah, my entry into the space tech world is ongoing, but about to kick off in quite an interesting way. We built for a client last year. We built the astronaut selection application for the Saudi Arabian Space Agency. That's quite a mouthful, but it was a really cool project. I'm a big space geek. I love it. Used to idolize Elon Musk, not so much anymore after the last few years, but yeah, it's just such a lucky, like we are so lucky to live in this period of human history, if you like technology, where technology and science advancement is allowing us to push boundaries and go places and do things that haven't been done before. That's exciting. But yeah, glass ceilings. I think your glass ceiling is where you put it. I'm a firm believer in that, but it can fluctuate, and you can subconsciously put it at different points that you don't realize.
I think that's the thing, is like personal development is the word I use because I still haven't figured out a better word to use. Choosing where you want to put it, choosing your limitations, choosing to understand what limitations you actually don't want to have and therefore don't have, choosing to get out of your way. That's part of that development journey. And there's also the subconscious element is, I guess when I say personal development, I really mean your subconscious personal development. As I think we can raise it consciously. But then if I go, yeah, I can achieve, and then I show up and I'm unconsciously sabotaging myself or treating people a certain way, immediately you're taking these steps back unconsciously. Immediately you're shooting yourself in the foot. That's why I think I personally really believe in manifestation when you understand what it actually is, which is this conscious projection into the world you do want, and therefore how you need to show up to do that, and therefore attracting the right things to you. And that doesn't mean you're not working for it. It became a fad. It became a misunderstanding of what it actually is, and it became just saying I'm manifesting it without putting in that work, or because you just saying the thing, saying the thing doesn't mean you're consciously showing up as the person who deserves the thing.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, I think.
Oh, I agree with that. I mean, I was, subconsciously manifesting before I even knew what it was.
I think we all are.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
We attract more of what we are.
Yeah. It's about, visualizing and plotting a path to get somewhere. And then, but in the very act of doing that, you're mapping out the steps you need to achieve your goals.
Yeah. You've mentioned a few times plotting a path forward and almost working backwards from that to get the results that you want. I have up behind you, actually, the camera can't see it, but for everyone's context, on a board that's up behind Will, I have a few goals for the podcast. Super simple. That is the scrappiest piece of gold paper ever. But I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule. So I was like, right, let me just write down my first goals for the show. And some of them on there are more superfluous than others. Some are very specific. So with podcasts, getting your first 3,000 subscribers, I think, is a little bit of old data. But 3,000 puts you into like the global top 10% or something crazy like that, just because most of them fail or are just incredibly niche.
Yeah.
The number of episodes I put out, most peter out by episode 20. So one of them up there is, get to 21 episodes just to break that. My first 100, my first few thousand followers on the various platforms. And these are just goals I want to achieve. And I kind of have the vision for what I want to have in the next year. So I've got the 5-year vision, the 1-year vision, and then some specific goals. But in between that, when you talk about plotting the path, what else should I be doing? What do you mean when you say plotting the path, and what should I be doing?
Reverse engineering your future envisaged success is what I mean by plotting a path.
How?
So I'm not a podcaster, for the record. So it's not, but I'll give it a go and we can play through the scenario.
Yes. Teach me how to reverse engineer my podcast. Right?
Yes. Yeah. All right. But I think, so you have a vision of where you want to get to, Joe Rogan levels of success?
Probably not. I wouldn't, obviously no one would say no, but he's in another stratosphere.
Yeah.
He's like number 2 has nothing on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is like several ridiculous multiples ahead.
Yeah.
But theoretically, sure.
But this is,
let's say top 50 podcast.
Mindset wise. But I find this interesting.
Okay.
So mindset wise, with the way that I set personal goals, I would look at that and go, well, he's in a stratosphere by himself. So why can't I get to the next stratosphere above that? Okay. He's shown it's possible to break a boundary by that many multiples. So then theoretically it's possible for you to do the same and go that much further. Sure. But I understand what you're saying as well. And this is not always the most healthy mindset, by the way, because it then leads to a lot of internal pressure and stress in trying to achieve what some would argue is unachievable to a point.
Okay.
But have a vision of where you want to get to. You've already covered that off. Have key milestones along the way. You've already covered that off. What do you need? It's just planning and breaking down into, and I think this comes from the agile, incremental planning, software engineering practices that I learned as a kid from my dad. Mm-hmm. It's the same, broadly speaking, things that made Elon Musk successful in the early days, which is why I liked it so much, is he took the agile principles of software engineering industry and applied them to spaceflight. Breaking things down into small problems, fail fast, small increments of problem solving, etc., etc. So I'd keep breaking things down into as smaller increments as possible, so that each one brings you a little successful way along the path. That's actually what I mean. And by doing that, and when I say each one, so each one might be record a single podcast, or hit a certain metric. And if you can set up a plan where you're hitting one of those every couple of days, then you constantly get the boost in motivation and endorphin and success.
Got you.
So it keeps propelling, and then it becomes a big ball of momentum.
So this thing I've got up behind you that says first 100 followers on streaming platforms, first 100 subs on YouTube, first 10,000 views, those are almost too big. Those are fine, but they're not incremental enough.
I would describe those as milestones.
Okay.
And I'm just dropping software engineering terms into everyday conversation. But I would describe those as milestones, and below them I would have tasks, and then I'd organize the tasks into, I wanted to use the word sprints because I'm on but they're not really sprints, that's misusing the term. I'd organize tasks into categories. So each milestone might have 20 tasks that you think you need to do to get there. Each task might have 5 subtasks in that regard.
Okay.
So, and break it down in a meticulous fashion and be prepared to cross stuff out and change it. And because you can never write a plan in advance that's going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. But I've found that it increases your chances towards success.
Yeah.
And it creates the momentum. I mean, I know, ADHD diagnosis and all that. I feed off of endorphins and serotonin and all of these chemicals much more than the average person. And I know that. And maybe it's just what works for me, I don't know. But, that feeling of successfully achieving a small thing, it's like the adage, you should always make your bed. The first thing you do as you get up is make your bed, because you start the day with a success, and that will breed more success.
Yeah, this does mirror things I've heard in now popular psychology a lot. Give your brain multiple wins, and it will know it's doing something right. Almost gamifying your day a little bit. Okay, interesting. So I need to have each of those goals or milestones attached to tasks and put those tasks into my weekly calendar with subtasks that help me do that, knowing that this small thing, I need to have faith that this will add up to something. Yeah. Because one of the things that I think gets in my way, it's not as bad as it used to be. A lot of people's way is the difference between what's happening in the now and that long-term plan, right? This long-term plan is vision, even not even the plan, is so big that this little thing, it just feels so small, and then it gets lost in the noise, and then I procrastinate and I don't do it. And talking about plans, there's a quote I've used a few times on this show now. Again, we talked about religion. It's not so much religious, but the concept of we make plans and God laughs. Again, not so much from the religious perspective, but just in general, the world might not give a shit about our plans. So how do I take that plan seriously and be okay with the day-to-day seeming minute? Do I just need to build faith in what I'm doing?
I think trust.
What do I do?
Trust the process. And again, this is the perfect textbook thinking. None of us are perfect. So I know my methodology that feels right and seems to work for me. Do I follow it every day? Of course I don't. I'm only human, just like the rest of us. I procrastinate. We do all of this kind of stuff. But I try to live life without looking back. Look back to analyze and learn, but don't look back to regret. But the reason why I mention that there is, at the time that you wrote down those micro tasks, subtasks, whatever you want to call them, you trusted that they were there for a reason. There's a reason why you put them on the piece of paper. So trust your previous self that that's the reason, and that's how it all adds up. And over time, it will get there. And I've been doing this, I think, somewhat subconsciously in my early life and an early career, to the point now where it can take a long time. I'm particularly stubborn or determined. There's lots of positive ways to put that. But, and it can be, a bad thing at times when you should pivot faster from a business perspective. If you've got the determination to really see it through, they will add up and you will get there. Like that, and just that belief inside. Yeah.
Having trust in oneself and in your future self. That's a really interesting takeaway. You've been applying these for a while, building and growing your business. You've now got some really crazy big name clients. Like you said, some household names, but also just folks who you wouldn't normally think of. The Saudi Space Agency. It sounds so random, but actually really huge. How did you go about building that client base? Right, I've talked about this snowball. How did things really start to snowball client-wise?
Most of our business has always been done through referrals.
Okay.
That's something that we've been strategically addressing this year, but this year for the first time. So
when you say strategically addressing, you mean like trying to get clients through other methods too?
Yeah, marketing campaigns. Okay. I've now got a commercial director who looks after our pipeline and is bringing in new leads, etc. But before then, it was just a period of growth based on mainly referrals, which in the agency world is a good enough way of going about things. Would I do things differently in hindsight? Yeah, probably. It's
like what?
proactively go after things earlier on. I should have, with hindsight, taken myself out of the internal delivery machine earlier. Our rapid growth this is like, business and agency 101. The thing is, I enjoyed it, right? I was doing what I enjoyed. So I don't regret it, but from building a business as not as fast as possible, but at the right trajectory that you would choose in advance, you need to get yourself out of the delivery machine as quickly as possible. Give yourself the room, the headroom, and to do strategic thinking and planning and guide the execution and people management as well as a small company. If you're creating an environment with the culture and the tools that allows people to do their best work, that needs some time and dedication as well. But because most of it was referral based, everything we've ever done, we've ensured is the best it could possibly be, that everyone's proud of it. Occasionally at our own cost, whether that's, a couple of weeks of extra resource or burning the midnight oil. But it's, and proud used to, we've just gone through, we're in the process of kind of rebranding at the moment. But we've now that we've got a bigger team, we've doubled in the last year, so we're up to 12 now. There's a lot of different views and values and experiences that are brought by that increase of people. And I felt it was important to reframe the company on the collective rather than my own principles, ultimately having built a company from one person out. So proud used to be one of our values, and it's not on the current list, not that there's anything necessarily behind that, and the new list are very similar to the old list. But and people would often say, yeah, but that's a negative, right? Pride is considered a negative trait. I mean, first of all, things are only negative if you want to view them in a half-empty way, right?
Everything's a tool.
Everything's a tool, and it's up to you how you use it.
Exactly, yeah.
And how you perceive it in others. But I just think it's not on the arrogant side of pride. It's just in we would ensure every piece of work we've ever done without fail is the best that we could do, and is something that you can hold up and compare to the very best in the industry and go, yeah, and I'm proud of that, and therefore clients feel like that, which means they refer us to their friends, their clients, and come back for more. And that's worked well.
Hey everyone, I hope you've enjoyed the show so far. I just wanted to take one quick sec to ask you for a huge favor. If you've been appreciating the show, the guests, the lessons, the journey we've been on, then the best way you can help out, to help me and help everybody else listening to this, is to subscribe to the show wherever you are. YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you're watching the show, hit the subscribe or follow or whatever other button and all the bells and icons, whatever else you're happy to keep up to date with the show, hear about new episodes as soon as they launch, and help us to grow and reach more people. I know you've heard this before, but it's because it really does help. It really would help out and makes the world of difference to me. So thank you in advance. And honestly, I really appreciate you. And one final quick note here. I wanted to draw your attention to my free weekly newsletter discussing a variety of topics to do with leadership development and discovery over on Substack. I'm always so humbled by all of the kind words of support I've received over the years from people reading my newsletters about how interesting or helpful that they've been. So if you want that extra hit of the thought-provoking conversation once a week, then you can find that in the show notes down below. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And let's get it.
And you've mostly been developing apps. Like you said, you can work across a number of areas of tech and design and things like that, but specialist app creation. working in and around startups for a long time, I see everyone wants an app of some kind. Give us the inside scoop on the app industry, because there are a lot of not so great things out there, and then you've got some specialist stuff out there. Give us the inside scoop.
So I think we've been living through a really exciting time in mobile app ecosystem. Going back to around the late noughties, hybrid app development became possible. That's things like React Native, now Flutter, that's relatively new. Ionic as a tech framework goes back a bit before that. You've got Xamarin, which is Microsoft's attempt at that. I'm not expecting any of this to necessarily go in. It's all a bit techie, but there are lots of tools out there that allow you to build once and deploy to iOS and Android. That's the key, which roughly reduces your costs by half. So it removes the barrier to entry for a lot of people, where in the past they would need big budgets to you'd need an iOS specialist and an Android specialist, and now you can get there cheaper and you can iterate. There are pros and cons and sacrifices, but they're worth it in the long run. I think if you build the right foundations for a technical product, you think about scalability earlier on, you have a plan that takes you from where you are in incremental steps, preparing to pivot if you need to, then yeah, you can achieve great things with limited. And I think what that you've then seen in the ecosystem is there's more startups that are bootstrapped, because it's cheap enough barrier to entry now that it's possible with some sacrifices. It's not pocket change or peanuts, but it's possible. It might be on the cheaper side of a product. Your barrier to entry might be the same as a house deposit. That's a serious wedge of cash. That's not to be sniffed at, but it's also just about achievable.
Yeah, I think it depends on the product. If you're using something like a no-code, you can get real cheap depending on your skill set. But I think this is when you go from the standard stuff that's out there to the specialist in-depth stuff that's really needed. And one of my gripes is, the saying, there's an app for that, right? They meme, if there's an app for that. I actually don't think that's always a good thing. I think we had anyone and everyone trying and still trying. I don't think this has really changed to create an app. There's an app for everything, but we don't need an app for everything. And often there's dozens of apps for everything, and we don't need dozens, sometimes even one app for everything. And so I guess I'm trying to understand when you actually need to create one. Because, you're talking about clients like the Saudi Space Agency, and some of these other really big names. That's different to a startup trying to develop, a B2C social learning app or something like that. These are worlds of difference, and understanding if we actually need that can be challenging, or seems to be.
I agree. And there's a lot of products, like we went through this recently. We're building a social network for someone called MyDex. It's a really exciting project. It addresses a couple of USPs in the social space. It takes on a couple of big players that each have their own solution to the problem. I obviously have to be a bit vague on purpose, but then combines them in a very unique way. And we had to do some deep soul searching. And by soul searching, I mean looking at business requirements, go-to-market strategy, commercial requirements, technical requirements, budget capabilities, scalability plans, TAM and SAM, how big is the market they're going into, etc. and come up with the right plan that made the most of what was available now, but then what was predicted to be available in the short term and medium term and long term. And we had to ask ourselves, should this be an app or a web product? We ended up going down the app route for a number of reasons, mainly down to there was a couple of features that involved hardware that are much easier, access to the camera, that kind of thing, which is not impossible through web, but it's a much cleaner, more user experience than web. You've got PWAs, progressive web apps, which are an underutilized tool, a little bit like QR codes. 10 years ago, when I was in advertising, I was trying to push QR codes on out-of-home adverts. So when you had an advert on the side of the bus stop, you could start to tie digital experiences with real world experiences. They weren't buying it, but these days they're everywhere. I had one on the back of a yogurt pack that my son opened yesterday, and I saw them in school as well. I went to look at primary schools the other day, and they had QR codes. 8-year-olds walking around with their own phones these days.
Mm-hmm.
That blew my mind.
I can't
a little
stand,
bit.
But it is happening.
Okay, cool. Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
Progressive web apps and are underutilized, and you can install them on your home screen. You can get push notifications, and a lot of times people want an app because it's deemed sexy. It's deemed,
yes,
which
I don't think it is anymore because you have so much crap out there.
True, but
or is that me being too harsh? Do you think?
No, I can understand where you're coming from. Running a company that specialises in app products, if I don't believe that, and because if I did, it would give me a major conflict of interest every day. I think there's a lack of good ones.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. I agree.
And I think the no code thing is, and I think the biggest reason why apps on the market, available at mass are not very good, is lack of discovery. So we don't embark on a project these days without doing a discovery phase. Understanding from the stakeholders, the visionaries, the pain points, but also understanding from user bases, surveys, competitor analysis, etc., and really finding the gap in the market and building the right solution for that. I think a lot of people, founders, agencies, just look at a problem, look at a brief and go, yeah, right, we're going to do that. Don't put the thought in. I think no code. I think no code platforms are potentially the future in terms of speed. And we use Webflow, which is a low code platform for all our marketing websites. And it's brilliant, but it's brilliant because you do the first 60, 70% very fast, and then you dive into the code behind it and do the bits that you want. So it speeds things up, reduces cost for end clients, but doesn't reduce capability. But the amount of times we've had to go in and rebuild from scratch or try and save a project that's been built from no code is insane, because it promises a lot, but the end execution is very limiting and doesn't give you the control and the ability to pivot, etc. I could go on for ages on that.
Okay, no, I got you. That's interesting because you're only going to have, at the moment, there's a trade-off for everything. Mm-hmm. And you've got to balance the trade-offs. I mentioned very briefly earlier, I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule. When things are super early and scrappy, fine. If you have to do that, sometimes there isn't a path forward after that or a vision forward after that, and then things just get messy.
Yeah, and I think in mobile app development, visionary founders don't always understand all the options available to them, not through any fault of their own.
Yeah, that's not their role. Yeah, their role is to be that visionary.
Yeah, but and you do a bit of Googling and you see this no-code SaaS platform that promises you the world. Yeah, you're going to try it out. But the technology, and because of the app industry's reputation going back a bit, where because you had an iOS developer or a team and an Android developer or team, it got very expensive very quickly. And not understanding that there's this middle ground of technology now where you can do things relatively fast and cheaply, but still at high quality. And that so much of quality comes into the way it's coded and the way you think through a technical problem, you know, in advance and then come up with the right solution rather than the tools and technology that you use.
Throughout this process of building your business, as we start to bring the conversation to a close, I want to reflect on how you felt during the process, thinking about it now in hindsight. Did you ever feel lost while you were building these last 7-8 years?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's natural to a large extent, and lonely. It's a lonely, being a founder and a sole founder is a lonely road. I was very lucky to have a lot of brilliant people around me on that journey that made it bearable. I had my father who'd kind of done something similar, not exactly the same industry, but you know, tech. Brilliant mentor, and Ned in Michael Ole, who I met when I worked at Dare. He was the CEO of Dare. He's been the CEO and CTO of lots of big agencies and companies, and always very accommodating with his knowledge and time and just wanting to help people grow, you know. And I think maybe that's where we aligned, thinking back to some of our conversation. And yeah, Jazz, my partner, I can't mention it without mentioning her, just because patience in abundance, you know, because as a founder, you're working late. You've got to, you know, particularly when you've got clients, it's not even your own business and your own product. You know, a client says jump, you say how high, particularly in your period of growth. You've kind of got to a certain extent. But that understanding, being able to bat around ideas with people, etc. But yeah, how did it feel? So, and I think my biggest lesson in hindsight is I wouldn't do it alone. I think it had certain, you know, benefits, but find a co-founder, and someone that you bounce off of, not that's too alike. Find someone that will tell you when you're wrong and when you're barking up the wrong tree. That those people are worth their weight in gold. But apart from that, it's been a very enjoyable journey. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. I'd just do it and find a co-founder early on.
Do you think that's the message you would give to your younger self? Or is there anything you would want to add to that?
Work smarter, not harder. Definitely. Don't stress the small stuff. When you care, certainly as much as I do about everything, and which again, it can be a superpower, but you know, and have those high quality standards, be proud of everything. And it's good to stress about the small details because they amount to the big details. But yeah, you know, you can overdo it, definitely.
Interesting.
Trust the process. A lot of the things I was saying earlier, I wouldn't have said to you as a younger person. That is the hindsight of having gone through this journey and coming out the successful side in the last couple of years. Trust the process.
I love it. You asked me earlier the patterns of success that I noticed and why things are a little bit different with you. And I guess the thing is that there is no one solution for everybody, but by taking what I call the zoomed out lens of leaders across industries and across time, it's what I love writing about. It's what I'm getting into more now and why I started the show. There are patterns that lead to success, but it's not always the same pattern. Sometimes it's a little bit like how as a child, for one person, a parent giving you too much of or not enough of one thing led to one result. In another child, exact same situation, the child turned out completely differently. And both of them are logical results of the pattern once you get to notice the pattern, it just so happens that there's more than one pattern. Human beings tend to result in a certain way when we go through certain experiences. And success is one of those things. When you go through certain experiences, you show up in certain ways. When you say don't sweat the small stuff, one of the books behind you, one of Stephen Bartlett's books, he goes, do sweat the small stuff. And it's like you just said, there's some nuance there where actually you do want to care about little details. You just need to know when to not anymore. And it's interesting because another thing he does is he just drops things and says no when he knows it's not right for him. There's a listening, there's an intuition, there's a bluntness and a ruthlessness, but you also need to be able to give people value. To give people value, you need to care. Otherwise, you wouldn't care enough to do the things that created real value, such as asking the right questions. So there are patterns you've fallen into or patterns that you were a part of. I don't know if patterns falling into is the right way of saying it, but it's where I'm at the moment. Yep. Some of the manifestations end up being different, but even those, that's part of the pattern recognition. So in a similar way to how, you noticed patterns in people in playing poker, I seem to be noticing patterns in people when it comes to leadership, to the stories that lead to that. And I'm hoping that by helping break it down more, we can reverse engineer, like you said, more of it for more people. Can we understand in our own lives what I need to be doing more of or less of? And not just doing, but being, thinking and showing up in certain ways. And so, when you show up with as much care and attention to detail as you do, I think that helps us take away a lot. The process, learning from computer science, from technical skills, but applying that to the rest of life, super, super valuable. And I just really appreciate what you've added into this greater picture today, the energy, the interest you bring up. And so I really appreciate having you on, man.
All good.
As we start to wrap up, I've got a closing question I ask to everybody. The show is called Lost and Searching. And so, Will, I would love to know, are there any answers in life you are still searching for?
Yes, lots. And if the answer was anything other than that, I would probably feel unfulfilled and concerned. Work-life balance is the thing that comes to the top of the mind. As a founder, serial entrepreneur, I've got multiple investments, companies I'm responsible for spearheading and driving towards success. But I want to be first and foremost a present and role model for my children, and help set new standards for what it means to be a man in this world, and a dad, and a supportive partner, etc. And I'm by no means perfect in all of these aspects at the moment. I strive to be, and and then that's obviously compounded with we're a fully remote team. Everyone works from home. We meet up once a month, but whenever the work and the opportunity gives us that. But for the most part, for the most part, I think that's a good strategy, particularly in our industry. But the big thing I notice is that time that is so valuable for the human brain, I think, to go between one thing and another thing. So the journey home, the commute, which, we all lament, and I lamented it for many years, hated it. But finish a business call at 6 p.m, walk down the stairs straight into
dinner
and yeah. Getting the 3-year-old off the kitchen counter, or etc., and without any time to swap between the two. And I think that can be quite damaging over time. Equally then, being at home and having the ability to go to the office in 30 seconds at 10 o'clock at night, not sure that's a healthy thing in the long run. So work-life balance would be the searching.
If I may suggest one thing to try out when you're thinking about that, replace the word balance with the word harmony and see what comes up for you.
Love that.
I heard this a few months ago. I've got a tool I'm working on where it brings together a few different pieces for the tool, and one of them is balance, and or was balance, I should say. And then I heard Jim Quick talk about reframing balance to harmony, because balance is a word we throw around a lot, but it doesn't mean much in our society. Trying to get the right balance is a bit strange, because the way I just used to and still do describe it is there is no the balance, there is your balance. Your balance is ensuring harmoniousness within your life. Yeah. And so what happens when you use that word and reframe it? I'm still exploring that. I think it'd be interesting for you to explore too. No, give it a try and let me know what comes up.
Well, the key thing about harmony is the understanding that both influence each other and have to play well together.
Exactly.
That's the reframe that is, I love that. That's
exactly.
Such a great point to end on.
I love this.
And I'm going to take that back and do something useful with it.
Nice, man. Will, thank you so much. I appreciate you. The show has, now been launched for a number of weeks. And it's actually doing, relatively speaking, fairly well. You know, my network's been super supportive. The growth has been decent. I'm about to get into lots of marketing stuff, but, you know, it's slow going, and podcast shows, it's a saturated space and things like this. And so, you know, you and the other couple of dozen first guests I'm having on the show, I just appreciate you all so much for giving me and giving our listeners the time, considering all of that. You know, it's a little hard to prove ROI at the moment, other than just enjoying the conversation. But I appreciate so much that we get to have an extended one here. So thanks a ton, man. I appreciate you. This has been really cool.
It's all good. I appreciate you too. Love our deep and meaningful chats. Go off on lots of tangents, and I just ultimately it's about giving back to the world as well. If some of the stories that everyone talks about this, these social media success stories and everything online, and it's not always easy. It's not always rosy. You can go through hardship, or people might feel like because they've had certain lives or gone through certain experiences, maybe they can't. And if that could inspire one person out there, that would be really cool.
I love it. Let's hope. I say hope. Let's create.
Let's manifest.
There you go. There you go. Great note to end on. Thanks so much, man. Love it.
All good. Love being here.